What Justice Looks Like in Black and White. Hosted by Harold Fisher, this three-part virtual town hall edition will address the current unrest around the country. You'll hear from activists and legal and political experts.
We are out here. We are scared.
Good evening, everyone. This is Harold Fisher, and this is the final installment of our special three-part series on the Daily Drum, Justice in Black and White, an examination of the issues that have come into focus since the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Tonight's focus is over, minding your vote and your business. This program can be heard on 96.3 WHUR, Sirius XM channel 141, WHUR.com, and streaming on all of our digital platforms. Tonight's program will be rebroadcast as the previous two at 10 p.m. on our sister station, WHUT TV channel 32. And like the previous virtual town halls, we're not taking any phone calls. However, you can join the conversation using the hashtag WHURFM. My guests are Dr. Michael Fauntroy, Associate Professor of Political Science at Howard University, Arisha Hatch, Vice President and Chief of Campaigns for Color of Change, and Maurice Weeks, Co-Executive Director of the Action Center on Race and the Economy. Also, we have George Frazier, who is the Chairman and CEO of the Global Networking and Economic Development Company, Frazier Net Incorporated. I want to thank all of you for participating in this really important conversation. Let me go right into this. This is for Dr. Fauntroy. How do we talk about the power of the protest and translating that into the power of the vote?
Well, essentially what you're talking about is how do we pivot from protest to politics? Because it's the politics that are going to determine the policies that will impact voters and citizens all over the country, in particular Black people. And so the energy that is being developed now around these police brutality protests must be transitioned into energy at the ballot box for voter registration in the interim, and for getting out the word about particular candidates that are useful or particularly harmful to Black interests. So for me, as always, it's an education first component because people need to know what they need to know. And it's my hope that we'll be able to begin to move in that direction. It will be a real shame if the momentum that appears to be building right now is not capitalized on. And we all have a responsibility to play a role in that regard. But things are there for us if we get organized and make some noise at the ballot box this fall.
Mm-hmm. Arisha, to that point, this is a watershed moment in American history, in political history, and yet we've already, in the minds of some people, this was a coronavirus year for 2020, and now all of a sudden it's, police brutality, Black Lives Matter. Talk to me about the attention span of, the protesters and specifically America. Are we going to forget about this if things begin to die down in a month?
It's hard to tell. It's become cliche in a week to say that we're living through a pandemic within a pandemic as the Black community. And as someone that's been doing this type of organizing work for the last 8 years, who 2 weeks after starting working at Color of Change, watched as Trayvon Martin was murdered and did not receive justice. I have become accustomed to sort of this boom and bust cycle of attention that the media and that others give to victims of police violence and to victims of to Black victims generally. And we are also living in a very dynamic news environment where with one tweet, with one new occurrence, the world can change. And so, we expect the story to shift. What I think is so powerful, what protesters and organizers in Minneapolis did, what organizers all across the country did, is that they gave George Floyd a window for justice that he would never have had. I think they've been out for over a week, 8 or 9 days. Folks in Ferguson protested for 2 weeks. And that's really all you can can ask for in these sorts of moments.
Compared to the protests and demonstrations of the past, is this different? Do you think this is different, Arisha, compared to the civil rights marches of the late 50s and the 60s? Is this the most unique protest that this country has seen for Black people?
It's definitely a transformational moment. I don't know that I'm ready right now to begin ranking where it fits in broader history. But I think what we've experienced at Color of Change, where over 5 million people have taken action in the last 3 weeks, between the murder of Ahmaud Arbery to the murder of George Floyd, more people are on our side on this issue than ever before. I felt like the images that I saw coming out of places like Portland, Oregon and Idaho with, all these white kids dying on the freeways. I don't know that I'd ever seen that before.
Yeah, and France and in London and other places.
Yes. And so we, for a movement that has been critiqued about our lack of progress, we have actually made a lot of progress in terms of changing hearts and minds, in terms of the specificness of our demands in this moment, and our ability to actually hold people accountable.
Let's talk a little bit about the economics, more specifically the money. We have heard, and we have certainly seen during the protests, during the unrest, that businesses have been destroyed, not only in white communities, but in Black communities. And we were already in an economic pandemic with the shutdown of the nation's economy because of the coronavirus. And I'll start with you, Maurice. What does all of this portend for the economy going forward? Look, the unemployment rate, there was a big surprise. 13%, not 25%. What's going on here?
Yeah, just a quick note on that rate. The unemployment rate actually ticked up for Black folks, which is a concern. Look, I think that not only were we in an economic crisis, we were heading for an economic depression. I mean, I think that we still are, with the amount of things that were closed, and how much we've let big business and private equity kind of run away with all of the rules in the economy. I think that we're still in really fragile shape, and those are things that really affect Black people, all people of color, but Black people in particular, really, really hard. So, we all probably have friends who are working multiple jobs, or working Lyft and working Uber and working Instacart or something like that. There just has been, folks have been on the edge for a really, really long time. And that's not even to mention the housing crisis that we had before this, and has been exacerbated by people's inability to make any money. So, in terms of the businesses, you're right. A lot of businesses were their facades were destroyed and things like that. Most of the businesses that were destroyed, I don't really shed a lot of tears for a Target or something like that being destroyed, because they will recover all of that money with their insurance. I think that what people are protesting for, it's more than just the murder of George Floyd. It's more than just police murders in general. It also includes the fact that the economic pathways for Black folks are just not where they should be if we're going to be in an equitable society. So if we're going to do that at all, if these protests are going to stop, we're going to have to make some real changes to how we do the economy in this country.
Equitable society. Let's talk a little bit about the money piece there, George. I've been hearing a lot of resurgence of conversation about reparations and what that looks like for Black people. And we're not talking about a $1,200 check with the president's name on it. We are talking about a wholesale look at what this means for Black people in its economy. Last night on NBC, Charlamagne the God was interviewed, and he said nothing good will come for America until America does right by Black people. does that mean economically? And what does that look like from your perspective?
Reparations will play a major role in the repair of what is now a huge disrepair of the economic state of Black people in this country, much of it driven by the need for financial education for all Black people. We may be the most financially illiterate people in America, and so I think we need to focus on that. This is a time to focus on. It's time to narrow in on understanding what I term as the 4 pillars for the intergenerational transfer of wealth. That is the proper management of accumulated wealth. That is the importance of real estate. What's the first thing God gave Adam? What's the first thing God gave Isaac? Real estate, real estate, real estate. The importance of business development. And every immigrant group that has ever come to this country has understood the importance of entrepreneurship and creating work and jobs for their people, because that is the only way to raise up the poor. And we're moving in that direction. More and more Black people are opening businesses. We have small businesses with sole proprietorships. Many of those businesses after this tragedy will not return. Probably 30 to 40% of the small businesses, Black businesses in this country, 2.5 million, 2.6 million, about 111,000 of them employ someone. The average income of an employee-based Black business is about $1.1 million annually, but the average income or annual revenues of a small sole proprietorship is about $18,000 a year, which is below the poverty line. They have been devastated with this pandemic. I think God works in mysterious ways, and I see some good in this. And I see that, in fact, we have been put in a position that we now have to all sit at a table, sit in a room, and focus on skilling ourselves up, bringing our skills up, whether it's our financial literacy skills, whether it's understanding and studying and what can one do about moving reparations forward. I think there is more steam for that. There's a huge case for it now. It is public. And of course, we know that when white folks catch a cold, Black people catch pneumonia, right? So we are going to really suffer. We're suffering in the death rate on a percentage per capita basis as it relates to the pandemic. So all of this is coming into full view of the American public. And I think there is a changing of hearts, a changing of minds. I think this is a seminal moment. I think this may be the tipping point. And we now have to execute. And I've said many times on many platforms that I've talked on over the years, I've given over 3,500 speeches, written 6 best-selling books on this subject, that essentially we have wanted progress without execution. Now is the time to execute, execute, execute. As someone stated in this presentation, that at some point in time, all this is going to end, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a month. Right. It may be.
Let me talk about that execution, because, once again, and this is for you, Michael, how do we execute some form of reparations, of economic apology for Black people? Does it, for example, start with more donations to civil rights organizations or organizations like Color of Change? Are we seeing more of that? What do you think?
Well, I think we have to begin with how it would have to happen. It would require congressional action and a presidential signature. So what we're talking about is legislation and political behavior. And that is often informed by what's happening in the streets and in the suites around the country, and whether or not people are sufficiently agitated, and if there's a crisis that sparks it. And so if those things are in place, be it through greater support for interest group organizations to help apply pressure, or just through the agency of individuals who will take the mantle and decide that I'm going to be more active in the political process to make sure that the things I want or the things that I think are important are actually acted upon and not just ignored, then we can potentially get there. But for me, it really is a question of voter turnout. And if Black people get organized and turned out in larger than usual numbers, then I think there is an opening for these kinds of reparations and other kinds of useful public policy. But until that happens, we're not quite in a place to do that. I will say, in sort of the underline something Dr. Frazier said, there does seem to be a big difference this time in terms of allyship, and we'll see if that is real or not. But if it is real, then I do believe that there is a broader coalition of people who are willing to push for what is right. And if that happens, then at that point, the door is open to a wide range of possible options.
Yeah, Harold, I agree with Michael 1,000%. Right now, the number one goal, certainly for Black people, but for America, I believe, is the good riddance of the person we have running the White House. That has to happen. If that does not happen, everything else is academic. We know that he is insane, all right? So it's not going to happen. And Black people must vote. We must vote. Even if you do not like both the candidates and you said, well, I don't like either one of them good enough, and I'm going to say, home, you have actually voted for Donald Trump, right? What they are trying to do is to repress the vote, right? So we must vote. We are an extraordinarily powerful force when we go to the polls.
Harold,
so we must, every Black person vote in the numbers we voted for Barack Hussein Obama in his first run. We must vote. That's critical. That's number one. We must get rid of this president, right?
Okay.
If we don't,
I want to, Dr. Frazier, I want to hear from Maurice, and then I have another question for Arisha to that point. Maurice, please go right ahead.
Yeah, just jump in here, and Dr. Frazier, I'm glad you mentioned Barack Obama. I mean, you won't get an argument from me that it's important to be engaged at the electoral level for all Black folks. Really, I think all folks, but certainly Black folks should be engaged. And some of my very good friends were tear gassed and pepper sprayed on the streets of Ferguson when Barack Hussein Obama was the president, right? So there's more going on than just what happens at the ballot box, and I think that it's imperative on all of us to make sure that we're I think it's imperative on all of us that we're dismantling the economic systems that create the realities that we're talking about. And it's imperative on all of our well-wishing white friends to get their cousins and make sure that we're actually dismantling white supremacy in this country, because it's not just it's not just the ballot box, although that's a key point. We have to get Donald Trump out. He is a Nazi, but we can't, even if we get Joe Biden or somebody else in, we're still left with some systemic and structural problems that we have to dismantle if we're going to get forward as people.
Yeah, and Maurice Noah can argue with that.
I need to get to Arisha, and one of the things that I wanted to say was, all I have to do is look at my email, and I can see the emails from Color of Change reaching out. But over the past couple of weeks, are you seeing people reaching in to Color of Change? Do you have the receipts that mirror what we're seeing in the street for the kind of activism that is going to be needed to carry more momentum?
We are definitely seeing an outpouring of energy. For example, Color of Change does not accept corporate donations. We do a lot of work around corporate accountability and corporate power. It's part of the leverage that we have in these sorts of conversations. And we saw this week a number of corporations dumping money to us and then announcing on social media that they'd given us money before we'd even accepted it. And so, as someone that does a lot of corporate accountability work and is often in tough negotiations and conversations with folks around a range of different issues, it's wonderful to see a business community sort of say, we are trying to speak out. We're trying to say that this shouldn't be the status quo, that we don't think that this is normal. or sustainable. But on the other hand, you know, it's often triggering, I think, as Black people and as Black organizers who have been living through this for generations, to experience people just having a sense of awareness about the pain that we've been facing.
And what are your thoughts about the economic piece of some form of reparations for the Black community from your perspective? You know, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I hope it's one of the things that I see in my lifetime as an organizer. I do think it, I still think we have a ways to go. As I think about, as I imagine the reality of reparations for Black people, it's like we have to have the perfect setup. We have to make the political reality true that will actually allow for that to happen, and up until which will take a while, which means, you know, not just a federal government, but having courts that will support some sort of, you know, radical move in this sort of way. And until that point, I still think that there's a lot more work to do, and it's work that's been going on, you know, for forever, to till the soil around culture change, around narrative change, around the importance of reparations, around how normalized reparations are across the globe, and instances of injustice. And so we're going to have to be very creative about how we continue to talk about reparations. When Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote his case for reparations, that was a piece of the step that brought more people into the fold. But we're going to have to have campaigns that push towards reparations, but that don't meet that like threshold that I think that we all want, which is like acknowledgement from the American government. You know, it might start with acknowledgement from a set of corporations who have benefited from slavery. But yeah, it's a necessary change, and America is going to continue to see these sorts of outbursts until these sorts of economic disparities are resolved.
Dr. Frazier, let me ask you this, because one of the things that has been discussed a lot this week when we're talking about reparations or economic opportunities is defunding police departments and moving that money to economic opportunities for communities of color. Good idea, bad idea, non-starter? What do you think?
No, I think defunding the prison system, the prison industrial complex, and putting it into the Black community, I think it's a powerful idea. It should be defunded, right? So yes, that is one of the claws in the talons of the eagle that we must focus on. No question about that. Defunding of the prison industrial complex. I'm sure everybody on this town hall meeting has seen 13th. And we know how that has been so devastating to the economic upward mobility of Black people, simply because of the focus on the Black male. So that's A. But Maurice and Michael also and Elise said we must narrow focus on changing laws. We are a country of a rule of laws, and it's the systemic laws that help to oppress us. There's just no question about that. They are a big assist. So, and Dr. Claude Anderson talked about this 25 years ago. The first step on freedom, the first level of freedom is economics, and the second level of freedom is politics. You use your economics, you use your money to buy, rent, lease, right? Politicians, right? Politics is about money. It's about money. So yes, you must vote, but you must also fund your representatives. If you ask an honest politician whether they would prefer your money or your vote, they will tell you, I prefer your money. If I get your money, I can get the vote, right? So they have to be funded, and someone other than us, which does the majority of the funding of most of our Black politicians, including Barack Hussein Obama, who needed $1 billion, right, to become president of the United States. Him and Michelle did not have $1 billion. They were funded by the public and private sector and, of course, private funding. Now, our brothers and sisters in the gay and lesbian movement, very powerful, very organized, and very moneyed. We know that when Barack Hussein Obama went into the presidency, he was firmly against gay marriage. We know that. He sat in the congregation of Jeremiah Wright. He was against gay marriage. Our brothers in the gay and lesbian movement put millions of dollars into his campaign. Did they want something? Yes. Hell to the yes, they wanted something for their enormous votes and their money. They wanted the right to be married. Mm-hmm. And Barack Hussein Obama got that law passed for them. Now, you think he did it just out of the goodness of his heart to change his own personal philosophy? No, that was funded by money. Mm-hmm. So we must vote and we must invest in our politicians. And for that, we want something. We want a return on that investment. And when we invest in you, not only with our vote, but with our money, we will hold you accountable.
So Harold, let me jump in quickly on this, because this is really critical. Vote, invest, and I would add monitor, because too often voters think that if they just elect the right people, certain kind of changes will just sort of self-execute. But that's not the way our process works. Right. And that was how Obama got in trouble in 2010, when many of the people who came out for him in 2008 didn't show up in 2010, and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. And so we need to engage in monitoring. We need to pay attention to what's going on, and we also need to make sure that people understand it's not just at the top of the food chain. Many of the decisions that are impacting our communities are being made at the state and local level. And when you talk about police policy, for example, these are often state and local decisions that help to drive this. So we need to be paying attention at all elections, at all levels, including voting, funding, and monitoring the elected officials to make sure they are operating in our best interest.
And I think, and to that point, people really, unfortunately, have to be excited about voting, not excited about who you're necessarily voting for, but you have to be excited about going to the polls, even if your favorite candidate is not there. And I think that's a really unfortunate thing about America, is that, yes, we have the right to vote, and yet so many people do not do
So Harold, this just drives me crazy, because it speaks to a real problem in our sort of political sophistication as a country. The reality is, and I've heard Ron Dellum said this to one of my classes years ago when he came and spoke, said politics is about making the best decision from the available options. Yeah. You don't necessarily have to like all the options, but you better make a decision, because if you don't, somebody else will. And people need to sort of get outside of their feelings to the extent possible, understanding, of course, that all of us have things that drive us in one way or one direction or another. But the reality is, man, we got to make the best decisions from the available options and understand that we're not just voting for someone, we're also voting against people.
Harold, can I just jump in?
Before you do, I just want to say thank you to George Frazier, because he's got to go at 7:30. But George, I wanted to thank you so much for participating in the program. Always great to have you on the show. Wish you the best of health. Keep fighting the good fight for the economic empowerment of Black people. And once again, I really thank you so much for being a part of this conversation.
Harold, you're the best host on the planet with the most intelligent questions. You got an awesome panel of brothers and sisters. They can hold it down. I really wish I could hang in there with you. I had a commitment for another Zoom call shortly, but I wanted to do this. I love WHUR, but you're in good hands, and they get it. And let me just say one final thing. If there's no, and I know we hear this all the time, every presidential race that comes around, oh, this is the most important presidential race in modern times. Well, brothers and sisters, this really is the most important presidential race in our lifetime. And you better get excited about it.
Yeah.
You better get excited about it, because if you don't vote, let me just say it one more time and still be loved, brothers and sisters. If you don't vote, you have just voted for Donald Trump. Okay. Don't get it twisted.
Well, George, again, thank you so much. And good luck to you. And look, stay safe. The pandemic is still an issue. So thank you. So much. I appreciate it. Love you too, man. I want to, Maurice, before I bring you back in, and maybe you can, talk about this, and actually we can have everyone discuss this. The Washington Post is now reporting that it was wrong in the way that it handled the protest, the kneeling protest by NFL players. Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, says that they encourage NFL players to protest peacefully. So, and this goes back to a meme that I saw today on Facebook with a photo of Colin Kaepernick, and it said right across the top, if I told you so was a person. That, in addition to at least in Minneapolis now, with the Minneapolis City Council has passed a law saying that officers should now jump in and intervene if a fellow officer is seen exerting excessive force. Of course, the other law saying that chokeholds should be banned. Duh. I mean, that's the governor of Minnesota said that's a really low bar. Talk to me a little bit about that if you can, Maurice.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing that when Colin was protesting, people were like, he just needs to find another way to do this, and then when folks are in the street, i.e. the other way to do this, people are like, oh, you should have a peaceful and quiet way to do this. So to me, that just equals that the problem is not the style of protest at all. It is just the demonstration of Black autonomy and Black power in general, which people are uncomfortable with, because it must be an uncomfortable position to be upholding a system that does to Black people what the system does. So it's no surprise that people want to go back to everyone just kneeling. And I see these pictures from various cities, including Minneapolis, I believe, of police officers kneeling in some supposed show of support to the protests. And a lot of the protesters on the street think that we're past that. We tried the kneeling and no one listened, and it's time to take to the streets so that people can actually see the power that we have. And just to sort of connect that to one note that we were talking about, with elections, I and Arisha as well, like I work on corporate campaigning, and one of the reasons that I find that an important thing to do is because for sure we should be funding politicians that we believe in. And Wells Fargo is funding politicians that they believe in. Bank of America is funding politicians that they believe in. Amazon is funding politicians that they believe in. And if I go in with my measly little $25, $50, I don't have a lot of money, Harold. So if I go in with my little $50, and the next person coming in after me is Citibank, and we're talking to the same politician, it's pretty obvious which one they're going to listen to first if we're both coming in with funds. So we need to invest in strategies that really weaken the stranglehold that corporations and corporate power has on our electoral system, which is an absolute crisis for democracy. We can't have Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Delta, all these corporations deciding which bills move forward and which don't, which politicians move forward and which don't. That is a crisis of democracy. So yes, get out and vote for Joe Biden, absolutely. Yes, fund your own politicians, and make sure that we're weakening the stranglehold of corporations on our democracy.
I want to remind our viewers and listeners that this is a special town hall edition of the Daily Drum, Justice in Black and White, an examination of the issues that have come into focus since the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is the final installment of the three-part series. It ain't over. Minding your vote and minding your business. Of course, our guests, we are continuing with Dr. Michael Fauntleroy, Associate Professor of Political Science at Harvard University, Arisha Hatch, Vice President and Chief of Campaigns for Color of Change, Maurice Weeks, Co-Executive Director of the Action Center on Race and the Economy. And now joining the conversation is Dr. William Spriggs. He is with the Howard Initiative on Public Opinion at the Graduate School of Howard University. He is also a well-known economist. Dr. Spriggs, thank you so much for joining the conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad I'm on.
Absolutely. It's good to see you. I want to talk to you a little bit about the economics. We talked about it during the first half of the program, but I want to talk to you a little bit more about this, about what might reparations or a change in the economy for Black people look like moving forward as we move through this watershed moment in American history.
Well, you're asking a lot of questions all in one.
Absolutely.
Let me start with before this botching of the way to shut down an economy took place. So obviously before then, we still had huge disparities that we could not heal even with full employment. And key among those is after centuries of discrimination in earnings, you can't close the gap with wealth because we've had too many years of low earnings. And that disadvantage was deepened by the Great Recession, because during the Great Recession, we lost a massive amount of wealth because of the crises in the housing market brought about by very pernicious loans and the predatory behavior of banks towards us. So anyone who believes that going forward you'll be able to provide the sufficient stability to the Black community simply by getting a few more college degrees is deluding themselves, and it's not a policy that's going to work. But you have to ask yourself, why do you want reparations? What's the real gap? And as you just heard, a big part of the gap is the ability to have power. That doesn't come from having average wealth. And so simply giving African Americans the wealth of an average white person wouldn't move the dial on that. And if you start from now and just give people money, then you also have to deal with the fact that having unequal ownership means we're going to buy products made by not Black people. So it's a deeper question, and people have to approach it much more deeply than that, because the part that I think people concentrate on the most really gets to the sense of power and the ability to make decisions about who hires, make decisions about which politicians get money, which universities have endowments, which arts institutions have endowments. So that's a much bigger question, a much broader question. But for the immediate, we're suffering through this mismanagement of the economy. And other countries, in all other countries, understanding that they were going to tell people we're going to have to shut down industries, they instituted wage subsidies to make sure that all the workers at those companies would get paid. They did not choose unemployment. So that meant, as we've seen in the news with Europe waking back up and people slowly going back to restaurants, those restaurant workers were being paid the whole time that they were off. We alone chose, oh, just throw them into unemployment and we'll figure it out later. And of course, we know what the other problem is. And then we'll complain that you're unemployed. And then we'll complain that you're getting an unemployment check. And you see all of that taking place right now.
I do want to talk a little bit more about this about this overarching issue about the NFL protest that has just come out. Arisha, I'd like to hear your thoughts about, in the good old Christian tradition, the pastor will say prayer changes things. Well, it looks like we can say protest changes things too. Your thoughts about what we're seeing, how people and organizations in positions of power are reacting to this protest, whether it be the NFL, whether it be city councils, politicians, and the like.
The NFL. I don't know. When I heard the news, I was just like, are we over the NFL yet? It's just been so much gaslighting at this point. Colin Kaepernick still doesn't have a job. I found, this moment that we went through over the course of this protest cycle to be, I don't know, it disenchanted me. I watch less games now. And I think part of the reason it was so disheartening was to watch an industry in which Black men have so much power, or Black people are carrying, we're the product. And to see us so disenfranchised, to see so many strong Black men powerless to do a simple symbolic gesture at the beginning of the game, I think was really hard for me to watch. And I know it was hard for others to watch. I couldn't help but think, I wish the NFL Players Union was as strong as the police unions, the Fraternal Order of Police. Maybe then Kaepernick would have a job. Maybe then, every week, at least back in the day when we were having sporting events, we could have been having a national conversation about the violence that Black people face. And so I would like to see them make real systemic investments and change, but a sort of a statement this week feels a little too late for me, a little too little too late.
Mm-hmm. How do we put pressure on businesses to make change? Voting is one thing for whether it's the White House, Congress, or dog catcher in your community. But as it relates to institutional systemic racism, and I know, Dr. Foncho, you're going to say, well, vote with your feet. Well, we've been saying that, but there has to be something more to put pressure.
I would say vote with your pocketbooks. I mean, listen, how many people who are watching us right now have bank accounts in Black-owned banks, or use Black professionals, or shop in places that they know are owned by Black people? Now, I get that in many parts of the country, that's not an easy option because there's just so few. But the truth is, if we were more selective in how we spent our money, we would be able to command a little more respect in that regard. We're not there yet, but I am again hopeful that we may well be at the beginning of a full sort of transformation in the way we think about our relationship to America and to the American economy. And if that happens, then perhaps we can begin to make some change, at least on the margins.
Maurice, does that mean that in voting with your wallet or voting with your pocketbook, that there has to be a new way to get the word out for organizations that do not treat people of color well as businesses, I should say, as well as businesses that do cater to communities of color?
Well, look, I mean, sure, it's I shop at Black businesses whenever I can. I think the problem that we're increasingly having in this economy, and I'm just a fake economist. We have a real one here, so I'm interested what Bill Spriggs has to say as well. But many industries have just these huge titans, which if they're not monopolies themselves, they're close to it. And especially when the pandemic hit, we saw that Amazon, for instance, gained a tremendous amount of power. It quickly became the only place where you could get, a large number of goods without, going to the end of the earth. That's essentially a monopoly. So, instead of, I wasn't encouraging people to not get those goods, of course. I mean, like if you need paper towels, if you need diapers, if you need anything of the many things that Amazon offers, you have to use them because you don't have a choice. What I think more interested in is doing campaigns that are directed at those companies that help to weaken its power and lifting up the workers in those companies that are speaking out and talking about their practices. So Amazon, for instance, the reason that they were able to provide all of those goods when the pandemic hit so quickly is because they were basically just sweeping all employee standards under the rug. So we had whistleblowers, black whistleblowers from their warehouses saying, I'm standing 2 feet away from my coworker. The 2 people have died from coronavirus in this warehouse, and Amazon still has done nothing. So supporting the type of work that allows workers like that to speak out, and just going back to what I said again, like weakening the stranglehold that these companies have on the economy and our political system is so important. It's of paramount importance.
Same kind of question, Dr. Spriggs. How do you put pressure on businesses, communities of color? Because we've said this for many years, we are not monolithic. We have various and sundry views. And if a company is not blatantly an offender, how do you get your voice heard to those Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies?
Well, part of this is the entire structure. Maurice just gave you the way forward. Is we have to restructure the power relationship. We've allowed firms to concentrate power, and we have taken away power from workers to organize. African Americans have a much higher unionization rate than do whites. That's because Black people know that a single person negotiating, if you're Black, with your boss, you've lost right there. And you can't put down the white privilege card that gets you your raise. So Congressman Bobby Scott has passed legislation in the House with Leader Pelosi's guidance to transform our labor laws, to update them so we can it's not updating them. It's really going back. It's going back to the lesson we learned from the 1930s. You have to have countervailing economic power centers. That's why we put in antitrust laws, but it's also why we empowered workers. Unfortunately, in the 1940s, we took away the power of workers. We passed what were called the Taft-Hartley amendments. They had 2 key components to them. One was we had a very strong racist movement against industrial unions. And so we passed what's called right to work laws. These are laws so that people get the benefits of union membership without paying the dues. In other words, it's to defund the union and therefore defang the union. The second most key was to remove it as a movement. So it outlawed secondary boycotts. So the way in which the labor movement was able to build up membership rapidly when the Wagner Act was passed, the National Labor Relations Act that was passed in the Great Depression, was because, take Walmart as an example, or let's take Amazon as an example. When those Black workers complained about their safety, then before Taft-Hartley, then they could have called to the Teamsters and said, these people are being unfair to us. And the Teamsters would have said, oh, you think a truck is going to come to your, not happening. No truck is coming. And if they said, well, we need our machines replaced, we got to have some electricians come in. The electricians would have said, you think we're coming to your place? Not going to happen. Oh, so we need the plumbing fixed. And so what happened was you removed the ability of labor to be a movement. Imagine if Unidos was told, well, it was a Black guy in Minneapolis, so you can't protest because the NAACP is protesting, and so you can't join in. That is what has happened. So this fix to labor law is vital to restore a balance between workers and management. So we're playing on the same playing field. We have the same sort of power. We have to fix the law so that there's not this freewheeling dismissal of workers and violations of the labor law as takes place today. So that's a key component because you have to have more power centers and power centers that level the playing field and get it to a point where you can then actually attack them. I mean, you do have to remember that most business in the US is business to business, and the ability to affect most business by a boycott by consumers is very difficult because the bigger part of the business doesn't involve consumers, and consumers don't matter. So even if you had very disciplined consumers, most of the business would not be affected.
You make an excellent point. You wanted to comment real quick, Arisha, before I wrap up, because I want to give everybody a chance to have some final thoughts. But I know you were chomping at the bit to add to this briefly.
Yeah, and Dr. Spriggs and just sort of made my point at the end is that one of the things that we've seen in our corporate accountability work is that it's actually not the boycott. It's one, because it's very hard to sustain. And two, as Maurice pointed out, in this globalized economy, it's hard to actually take a substantial piece out. But companies that rely on their public image seem more nervous about their brand. They seem more responsive when their workers are also putting internal pressure. And that's the way forward that we've been able to see in this current social media environment, whether it's payment service providers like Amex or PayPal, or Apple Pay allowing white supremacists to use their payment provider on their website. We talked to them well before Charlottesville about the fact that they shouldn't be allowed to do that. It wasn't until Charlottesville happened and their names were put next to tiki torches that they decided to change their mind about a piece of their business that made up less than 0.0001% of their bottom line.
Well, I only have a few minutes left. I will, Dr. Spriggs and Arisha, I've allowed you all to have a kind of a final word. I want to have Dr. Fauntroy and then Maurice go ahead. Dr. Fauntroy, I'm going to hold up my hand when you need to just take that, because I have a hard. But I'll give you a quick minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm really happy to be a part of all this with all these wonderful people. So for me, as a political scientist, I'm really focused on the use of politics to shape policy in ways that positively impact people. And so it's my hope that as we move forward, people will see the connection, that the things that happen today impact tomorrow's elections, and that if people begin to focus more acutely on what's in their own interest and understand that politics and such is something that requires consistent attention and activity, I think we'll get where we need to be in terms of public policy changes. But it's not going to happen quickly. People need to be patient, but it will happen if people if everybody does their share.
Maurice, I'll let you have a final word. Please go right ahead.
Yeah, and I think what I'm thinking about going forward, and just again making the connections to the economic conditions that are also underlying all of these protests, and where we heard today from some of President Trump's advisors that they're considering not doing another stimulus bill because of today's jobs report. And if there was one way to guarantee unrest going forward, it would be not doing another stimulus bill, because that would create economic chaos for Black folks going forward. So I think it's important for all of us who do political work to push on elected officials to make sure that we make it clear that we're not done here with this recession or this pandemic, and there's still a lot of work to go. And that's a key piece to solving all of the unrest and economic inequity in this country.
And let us not, of course, forget about the vote. The vote.
Absolutely.
That's I think that really is a key piece. Not just, as we said earlier, being excited about the man or the woman that you're going to vote for, but just be excited about getting to the polls. We have got to continue to push Black people to let their voices heard, not just in the streets, but at the polls, not just during a presidential election year, but midterms, whether you're voting for president or voting for the president of your HOA, because all of those things matter. I want to thank each and every one of you for spending some time with us. Dr. Fontroy, Arisha Hatch, Dr. Spriggs, Maurice Weeks. Thank you all so very, very much for spending this important time. And remember, as we say always, the coronavirus is still out there. We ask that you all continue to be safe. So again, thank you so much for being a part of this important discussion.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we also want to thank you for joining us for Justice in Black and White, the special 3-part virtual town hall edition of the Daily Drum. Of course, you can catch a rebroadcast of tonight's show on our sister station, WHUT TV, channel 32, at 10 o'clock tonight. I'm Harold Fisher. Have a wonderful weekend. Good night.